My hometown is incredibly underprivileged. Most residents live in poverty, many are the victims of local crime, and few ever have the opportunity to experience a better life. Most of my childhood friends never graduated high school, and some have resorted to crime as a means of getting by. Throughout elementary school, I had a best friend who I'll call Raina. Raina was one of the many people I knew whose parents barely had enough to get by, so she often had to do without things she wanted or even needed. Her parents had very little time to give to her, and what extra time they did have was usually spent fighting with each other. I can remember all the times Raina called me crying. Sometimes she called because her parents had had an especially bad fight and one of them had left home. Sometimes she called because she'd asked for something special at the store and she'd been yelled at for being selfish. The worst times were when she called because she'd done well in school and was so proud of herself that she told her mom about it and was always met with an answer that was something along the lines of, "You think you're special? You think you're better than me? You'll never be better than me, and wasting time with school isn't putting any food on our table." These conversations gave me my first push towards helping professions. They made me realize that I was both interested in and good at talking to people, that I valued what people had to say, particularly when they expressed their emotions. They made me realize that I was good at making people feel better through conversations, and that I felt good about myself when I did. When I sit back and think about all the reasons I want to be a counselor, Raina and the problems she struggled with is always one of the first things to enter my mind. Growing up, I saw underprivileged people all around me, but because I was so immersed in it, it always seemed normal to me. I always felt terrible watching people I knew struggle, but it wasn't until I got older and moved away from my hometown that I realized how unfair it was and that for most people, struggling isn't the norm. I first began to really discover my passion for working with underprivileged youth when I started volunteering at Middleway House my junior year of college. Middleway House is a domestic violence shelter here in Bloomington. The emergency shelter houses battered women and children in the short term, while the RISE acts as a more permanent residence for women and children trying to escape an abusive situation. I volunteered at the RISE as a youth tutor, and many of the kids there struggled with the same issues as many of my own friends growing up, including poverty, an unstable family life, and an inability to get a good education. After going so many years without really meeting people experiencing those types of struggles, working with the kids at Middleway was a really big shock for me. Everything really clicked into place for me one night when I was tutoring a 12-year-old girl who I'll call Gina in math. I asked her what 100 minus 10 was, and she was unable to tell me and had no idea how to figure it out. After talking with my supervisor that night, I found out that Gina wasn't learning disabled in any way, but that her abusive father had often kept her home from school to hide her bruises, and when she fell behind, no one had put the proper effort into helping her get back up to speed. It was then that I realized that I wanted to work with underprivileged youth in some way. I felt that kids like Gina were so deserving of so much more than they were getting, and I wanted to be the person who really made a difference in their lives. Working with Gina made me feel like I was doing something really important, and that was really valuable to me. I also discovered that I was really good at communicating with that population, as I was able to relate to them as a result of my own experiences with my childhood friends. At this point in my life, I was able to understand the meaning of the word empathy, and I realized that being empathetic was a skill that I possessed and that I hope to be able to utilize in my future career. Although my previous experiences taught me that I wanted to work in a helping profession and that I wanted to work with underprivileged youth, I still wasn't positive exactly what career was right for me. I'd considered social work but dismissed the idea because of the low pay and extremely long hours, and the fact that often there is little that social workers can do themselves to help a child in need. I also considered just becoming a child counselor, but I realized that there would be no way to ensure that I worked mostly with underprivileged youth, and that was a deal breaker for me. Everything really clicked into place when I started interning at Templeton Elementary School last spring. Templeton Elementary School is located here in Bloomington. The students are grades preschool through 6th, and the majority of them come from low-income families. When I started interning at Templeton, I did it solely as part of a service learning requirement for one of my counseling classes. At the time, I had no interest whatsoever in working in a school and really hadn't even given the idea any thought. Once I started working with the kids at Templeton, though, my mind changed completely. I realized that by working in a low-income school, I would not only get to work with the population I wanted to work with, but would also get to work with them in a major capacity as kids spend so much of their time at school. I also realized that school is the foundation that helps kids create a better life for themselves, so by helping them in school, I would, in many ways, be helping them for the rest of their lives. While at Templeton, I worked under the school social worker whose name is Leslie. Together we did both group counseling and one-on-one counseling, mostly for kids in preschool through 2nd grade, but sometimes for older kids as well. I got to see firsthand the difference that counseling made for these kids, and I also got to see how much they depended on Leslie and how much she meant to them. It was so easy for me to envision myself in Leslie's shoes, and I knew then that I wanted to be a school social worker or counselor. Interning at Templeton has helped me realize how much I value education and how driven I am to make sure that all kids have the opportunity to receive a good one. It has also helped me to realize that I am skilled in communicating with kids, particularly little ones, and that I genuinely love doing it. There's nothing I value more than knowing that I have, in some way, made a struggling child's life a little easier, and interning at Templeton helped me realize that I will have more opportunities to do that by working in a school than I will anywhere else. In terms of choosing a career, I am privileged in many ways. One of my privileges is that I have had access to a good education my whole life, which I believe is very valuable. Another of my privileges is that I have enough financial stability to have been able to attend college rather than having to work full-time, and also to have been able to pay for college. These privileges have drastically impacted my career development, as without having had a good education throughout my childhood, I would have been unable to attend college, and without having the means to attend college, I would have been unable to even consider careers requiring a college degree. Although I am privileged in many ways, I also experience barriers to my career development. One of my barriers is that getting a graduate degree is very expensive, and I may not have the financial means to obtain one right away, which means it may be some time before I can work as a counselor or social worker. Additionally, it can be very difficult to find a job in social services that pays a livable salary when you have only a bachelor's degree. So until I get my graduate degree, I may have to work a job that is totally unrelated to my interest in social services, just to ensure that I have a salary that I can survive on. In essence, I may have to sacrifice working somewhere that I am interested in, or working a job that I value, for working somewhere that will pay me enough to get by. Although the situation is not ideal, I have the privilege of having supportive friends and family who will make the possibility of having to work a job that doesn't reflect my values and interests much easier.